So welcome everybody to our writing workshop. We're calling it Communicating Forestry. This is the first of 4 sessions. And I want to thank the people on the committee who have helped put this together. So the main drivers of this workshop have been, there's 5 of us. It's me, I'm the current chair of the Rothrock Chapter for the Society of American Foresters, Sandy Smith, Tracy Coulter, and Jared Ernico, and Paul Lupo. And we're all members of the executive committee with Rothrock SAF. And when we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do this summer, ordinarily what we do in the summer is do a field tour, and obviously lots of things have changed and required some, I guess, out of the box thinking of what we were going to do to try and bring together Rothrock SAF and for the summer instead of doing a field tour. And so we try to think about what sort of skills do we want to work on. Ordinarily we meet in the field, we talk about forestry, we talk about, various aspects of, timber sales or cutting or recreation or things like that that are related to the work of being a forester. And one thing that I don't know that we've ever really talked about is writing. And I know for myself, writing is difficult for me. I don't particularly enjoy doing it, but I have to do it a lot. I do it every day, obviously, in writing an email, but I also write scientific articles. I write articles for outreach, lots of different things. And so, we realized as we were talking as a committee that it's something that pretty much everyone struggles with in one way or another, from maybe the brainstorming stage, writing a draft, getting feedback, all the way to that final publication. So as we were brainstorming how we can create something that deals with writing, we thought, what better way to do that than to invite people. Today we've got Van Wagner and Claire Bow-Richter, who do writing professionally in various different aspects. Claire, you teach writing, you teach workshopping and how to do exactly what we wanted to do in terms of creating sort of a group to work on writing. And then Van, you are an incredibly prolific writer, creative writer of various media, including music. And so in our later sessions, we're going to have people who do also creative writing, but then scientific writing. How do you write forest management plans? All the different aspects that we could possibly do in writing about natural resources and forestry specifically. And so for those of you who have registered for our 4 sessions, we've got these professionals who are going to talk about writing, how they write, how to workshop today in particular, and then also in our 4th session, we'll talk a little bit more about applied, what we want to create out of this. But what we hope to do with our attendees following these sessions, these 4 sessions, the entirety of the workshop, what we hope to do with all of you is create what we're tentatively calling the Rothrock Writers Guild. And we can change that later, but we've kind of grown to like it. And basically the idea is to create a group of people who are willing to work with one another on their writing. Sometimes the first step is just brainstorming, and sometimes it's really helpful to have someone that you can talk about an idea, a nascent idea, and work through maybe some writer's block or roadblocks that you're having with creating that idea, and then that helps you get to writing. And sometimes you've got that idea and you've flushed it out a little bit and you need someone to review a first draft and just give you some feedback on how it looks. And sometimes you've got everything flushed out and you want someone to kind of look it over and do some final editing. And we're hoping that something like that will be created out of this set of sessions and this workshop as a whole. It's a little squishy right now. We don't know exactly what the final product is going to look like. And so we hope that that will be a discussion with you as the attendees, that we can figure out what we want to create, how we want to create it. Maybe it's going to be through follow-up Zoom sessions. Maybe it's going to be through a listserv that we create on the Rothrock SAF website. Maybe it's going to be a Facebook group. Maybe it'll be a combination of all those kinds of things. So what I hope you'll do as attendees is, especially after this first session, because Claire is going to talk about workshopping in particular, and that's probably what we'll end up doing to a large degree. Think about how we can do that. What would you like to see as an attendee from this group? What do you need as a writer in natural resources and doing the outreach or applied writing that you have to do on a day-to-day basis. So that's my challenge to you as attendees. Can you get us some feedback in the next session? By session 3 is really when we're going to start to kind of nail down what we want to create, and then obviously by session 4 we'll have hopefully a nice, well-rounded view of what we want to create following these workshop sessions. So I think that's it. Sandy, did I miss anything?
Unmuted. No, let me just add 2 things. One is we're all here. The people that organized this workshop are all here, not because we organized it, but because we believed in this and we were excited about it. So this is an idea we grew some passion for and are participating in this as well. And also, let's see, what was the other thing? Oh, we're recording these so that if someone has to miss a section or a session, they can watch it and keep up with the group. There's at least 1 or 2 people that couldn't be at this session this morning, and they'll make up, and then they'll watch the next one. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Van Wagner, who probably needs no introduction to anyone, who is local in Pennsylvania. Van is one of these local treasures, and he's a songwriter, known as a songwriter. He's a teacher. He's a writer. He's a prolific writer at that. And let me say, we're all writers. That was the other thing I wanted to remember there that Sarah was talking about. We're all writers if we write. And some people write a whole lot more than others. And those people that write a lot more than most of us are the people that we've invited to come talk to us about their writing. And Van, I'm going to jump right in and ask you, how did you get started in writing? And this means songwriting or article writing or social media writing that you do quite a bit of. And what appealed to you or motivated you about becoming a writer?
Sure. I think first and foremost, I'll tell you what I'm not. I am not a writer by trade. I wasn't trained in writing. I'm a graduate of the School of Forest Resources at Penn State, and very science background. And as I'm sure many participants to this can appreciate, we in science teach such bare bones writing. Don't be flowery. I remember handing in my first lab report at Penn State and getting a terrible grade on it. And I was like, but it was filled with colorful language. And he's like, I don't want any of that. Tell me how many milliliters, how many degrees. And sometimes that has been a hindrance to my writing methods now, but I think sometimes too, it helped me understand what I'm not doing. I'm not writing necessarily a scientific journal entry. I'm trying whether I'm writing a song or whether I'm writing an essay or whatever it might be, I'm trying to connect with kind of a non-science audience in many cases. I'm trying to take something that I'm passionate about and get it into the hands of other people who maybe aren't foresters, they aren't environmental scientists, but I think that they'd be able to understand it. And so I think maybe that background in science helps me understand how not to write sometimes when I'm trying to reach those people. Songwriting, I think I'll start with though, because songwriting is really where I got my start at writing and trying to communicate ideas to other people. And I'm a big fan of the folk singer Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie wrote This Land Is Your Land and a few other songs that I bet folks have heard of, and went on to inspire a whole generation of 60s folk singers, Bob Dylan and Peter, Paul and Mary and many folks. Woody had a method of songwriting that was just real basic, and he was very open about that. He said, all I can write is what I see. And he talked about, just trying to keep a really simple message in a song. I believe Pete Seeger said, Woody said something to the effect of once of, any fool can write a complicated song about how complicated life is, but it takes some thinking to write a simple song about our very, very complicated lives. And so I really like that school of thought of just keeping it simple, whether I'm sitting down to write a song or whether I'm writing an essay that I'm going to post on Facebook. So that's kind of my background, and that's kind of how I approach writing. I'm sorry, Sandy, you are muted.
Okay, I thought I was on my other account where I can just press the space bar. I didn't mention that you're also a school teacher, and school starts tomorrow, I think, right? You start having meetings or whatever tomorrow or the next day. So you're busy guy, and writing is something you do kind of on the side. Even your music is a little bit on the side, though you probably would like it if it wasn't just the side. But So what types of writing and topics have you written about, and where do you share or publish it?
I'll hit that, but you just touched on, I think, an important point that maybe folks will appreciate and maybe be able to relate to, which is, although maybe you could say I write professionally, I don't need to. And I think you just hit an important point. I'm very fortunate to have my career, which is teaching. And I don't want to necessarily say I do it as a hobby, but my music and my writing aren't these things that loom over me that I think I have to hit a deadline, or I'm not going to be able to pay rent, or I'm not going to put food on the table. I think that would be an entirely different monster. I'm very fortunate that I have the luxury of having a career, a profession, and if and when I find a little breathing room, I can sit down and put my thoughts on paper, so to speak. I do. And that is a nice way to approach it if you have the luxury to do that. Probably every person participating in this is coming from a different place. I'm thinking of my wife, for example, who now works for the North Central Pennsylvania Conservancy. And she has deadlines where she has to hand in, written things now and then. And I've noticed it's just it's a whole different way of approaching writing when you have a deadline. But let's hit your question of topics. I think first and foremost, it has to be a topic you're passionate about as a writer. You can't fake it. You can't fool your audience. And where that can be a problem for me now and then is people will give me a homework assignment, so to speak, a songwriting homework assignment. People will say, oh, you really need to write a song about, I'll give you a real life example. For probably 5 or 6 years, people have told me about a bootlegger from the 1930s whose name was Prince Farrington. Rambled all around Williamsport, Lock Haven, Renova area. And there were all these legends about him. And people kept asking me to write a song. And I appreciated that. But the truth is, I didn't have much passion there. I didn't have any connection to him. For one reason or another, the story of moonshine I find interesting, but it's just not a huge passion of mine. And years later, there I am at Lewisburg High School, sitting down with a coworker who's an English teacher named Ty Russell. And one day we're just shooting the breeze and talking. And he explained that his family had come from up in the Renova area. And he said, yeah, my grandfather used to be involved in bootlegging up there. And we dug a little deeper, and he worked for Prince Farrington and had all these great firsthand family stories of being that kid growing up in logging country. The logging jobs were falling apart. The sawmills were closing down. It's the Great Depression. So he falls into being, a moonshine runner. That part I was passionate about. I thought I can identify with that the connection to the forestry story and the lumber heritage region, if you will. So we wrote a song together about Prince Farrington, and it's out there. But those are the topics I love to write about. If I can find a connection to something, I'm probably sounding a little selfish here, but I'm just being very honest. It has to be something I have buy-in to. It has to be something I'm passionate about, or it's just not quality work. And I think a trick you can try to use as a writer, though, is try to find that spin, so to speak, or the story within the story that interests you. And I can't give a second example right now, but if you're given topic A and you're like, I'm not into topic A, dig a little deeper. There may be a subtopic in there that you can really draw upon your passions, and then you start writing about that. And next thing you know, it's no longer an article or a piece about topic A. It's kind of a few degrees away, but if you read your article or your whatever it is your work is, you've covered all the main points and you've told the story of topic A. So like we wrote a story about this man's grandfather growing up in the northern Pennsylvania, hard times. So it's a song about that. But if you listen to the song, you get the gist of who Prince Farrington was, even though I never sat down to write a song about Prince Farrington.
That's interesting. Van, and you've kind of gone ahead a little bit, but let's come back to where do you publish your writing, or what are your outlets for your writing or your songs too? I mean, I know you have CDs. You sell CDs when you have a concert, and you can buy your CDs. You can buy your music and CDs on iTunes. You're prolific. You produce a CD every year, at least. I enjoy every one of them. And you pointed out to me once that it's really good to listen to the whole CD, not just to one song, because each CD is kind of a work. And I agree with you. I don't know if I ever told you that. I agree with you, but you publish, so to speak, in many places you're writing, and it's out there, and people enjoy reading it. Tell us about that.
I will. And as I'm speaking here, it'd be helpful if any folks could tell me in the chat window, which I have open, it'd be helpful to know if any of you have more of a musical interest, because I'll talk a little bit more about that. But if we don't have if we don't have a couple musicians here who are even interested in that, I'll keep my focus more on some of the essays I write and some of the videos I publish that are more meant to be just, educational, because I think that's probably where this group is coming from. So this is going to touch on a point I made earlier, which is I don't need to make money off of this. So I realize that puts me in sometimes a unique position, but I'm just going to tell you that's where I'm coming from. So let's see. My most recent piece, I think that of something related to forestry that I put out there on social media, so to speak, was I made fiddle rosin using spruce sap, and so I start with the topic. I think to myself, okay, I've got this topic that I'm into. The other day I thought I'm gonna whip up a batch of boiling sap, and I'm gonna turn it into fiddle rosin. So then I thought, okay, if I'm gonna do this, do I want to video it? Do I just want to take photos and then type it up as an essay? And I thought there's enough movement and action. Anytime you're dealing with fire, especially, there's enough that I thought this will be a good video. So I start with the topic. I'm going to make fiddle rosin, and then I think, what's the outlet going to be? And so I put together just kind of a homespun video. I used a GoPro camera. I'm far from a professional photographer, and I'm a very amateur video editor. I have a MacBook here, and the standard video editing software is iMovie. And I try not to obsess. I film it, I chop as much out as I can, and I try to edit it in about the same amount of time that I filmed it. I don't want to sit there and spend hours and hours and hours trying to get it just right, because at the end of the day, it's meant to just be a homemade kind of bootleg, hey, here's what I did with my afternoon kind of a thing. And then I put it out there on YouTube and Facebook. And I'll mention a quick trick that if you are in the social media business, a trick I've learned is if you're trying to get maximum views of a video, for example, it's okay to put the video on YouTube. But if you post to YouTube and then you post your YouTube in your Facebook page, for example, you're going to only get about 10% of the views, as opposed if you took the raw video file. So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and I'll post to YouTube, but I'll keep the video file, the .mov, the .movie file, or .mp4, or whatever the different formats are. And I will upload that into Facebook, and I will get 10 times the views and engagement when I do that. That was a trick I learned this year that some of you might have been like, I could have told you that last year, but I only just learned that, and it really does make a difference. Unfortunately, though, it makes it a little bit tougher for folks to share it. That's the benefit of YouTube. YouTube, you can send that link to anybody. If you're putting it in Facebook, only Facebook users see it, and then it's a little bit trickier and clunkier. But there was my pine pitch video, and then what I ended up doing, I think, is I made a piece of fiddle rosin, and a little gimmick I came up with that would, I think, get even more attention. I thought, if I can somehow tie this into a fundraising effort or something else, it'll get even more buy-in, and it'll get more shares. And so there's a scholarship fund in honor of a friend of mine who was a great fiddle player who passed away a few years ago, Sue Cunningham. And her festival would have been this coming week. It's called Hickory Fest, and it's every year up in Tioga County. I love that festival, and it's, of course, canceled this year. So what we did is I said, okay, you've seen the video, and at the end of the video, I said, I'm going to sell this on eBay. The highest bidder, you're going to make a donation to the Sue Cunningham Memorial Scholarship Fund. And so that was my whole effort, and what put it out there. And sure enough, what would happen is kind of what I expected to happen. People who love Sue Cunningham's music and remember her, they shared it, and they shared it, and they shared it. And the thing had thousands of views with, let's face it, something pretty boring, except for us foresters and tree geeks. Who else wants to watch somebody boil tree sap and make fiddle rosin? The average person is not going to care about that. So I think it's those little tricks where you're trying to tie it into other people's interests. And so their other interests were that festival. Their other interests were, a fundraising effort. Those are the things you can kind of piggyback on. So I hope that answered some of your questions about kind of how I get things out there. I won't go through each of the options, but I picked one topic there, and I explained that once I've picked the topic, I think what's going to be the best way to deliver. And so, like I said,
with that, Van, well, I'm sorry.
Having fire, video was the way to go, but it's not always the way to go. Sometimes there's just going to be a lot more that I think I want to type this up. I want to get the names and the dates typed up. So yeah,
and I do notice sometimes you'll write an essay. Your pitch pine one was an essay, and it was a video, I think. And I don't know whether rosin was an essay as well, but I'm always seeing, or I'm often seeing your articles, which then you also produce a video to go along with it, or vice versa, I guess. So that's interesting that you'll write it up, because your writing's very good, and I like to have it because sometimes that's an easier way to store the information than to go back and find a video. Van, you write a lot about history, and you often connect with history and natural resources. Are there other areas, that you particularly like to write about, or is that your main thing?
I find that I often am dabbling with what was a term someone used to describe it? They called it like, someone said, I saw a review of one of my albums, and someone said he dabbles in like natural philosophy and spirituality. He said something like that. And I guess, long story short, I do occasionally write songs that they're not about history. They're not specifically about natural resources, but I will write some. They're not meant to be philosophical so much as just some thoughts about, the beauty of creation and all the mysteries that go with forest ecology. But I look at them sometimes in more of a whimsical way rather than in a scientific way. And I like to write those kind of songs. So I'm approaching that a little bit more like poetry, a little bit more like I'm not just trying to deliver a story. I'm just kind of, sure, I'm conveying a thought or a question, but I'm not even necessarily trying to reach any conclusion. I'm just posing some interesting forest observations. And sometimes I'm guilty of adding a layer of spirituality to that. Those sometimes leave my listeners, I don't know if confused is the word, but the folks that buy into my, he writes songs about Pennsylvania history, the folks that have labeled me as that, they'll be seeking those songs, and then all of a sudden comes kind of a weird song about, I have a song about black bears that just kind of touches on their mystique and I think sometimes folks are like, well, there's no history lesson there. No, there isn't. Just a song about black bears.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that one. That one always has a real powerful effect on me, in addition to my enjoying your history ones. So here's another question. What's your process for writing? You've kind of told us your process for putting a video together, but what about if you sit down to write the lyrics or to write an essay? Are there any tools or methods you use? Do you have to confine yourself to a woodshed or something? What do you do? Do you only write with a ink pen?
I'll answer that from a musical point of view, because that's just a little bit more of, I crank out far more music, and I've been doing it for far more years than essays and things like that. So musically, I don't necessarily I don't sit down and create a quiet space. I don't reserve time. I know writers that do that, where they will say, tomorrow morning from 8 o'clock till 9 o'clock, I'm going to sit with a cup of coffee and I'm going to write. It just doesn't work for me like that. It comes when it comes. And maybe that's more the music. I don't know. But so I've learned to just, in my life, be prepared for as much as possible for it to come when it comes. It's sometimes when I'm in a car traveling. It's sometimes when I'm in my tree stand hunting. But sometimes there obviously needs to be a little bit of mental quiet time. Doesn't mean I've set that time aside, but it rarely happens when I'm in the middle of a chaotic situation. So if I'm in the middle of my classroom, I'm not going to get a song idea in the middle of having 30 students and a little bit of chaos. But in between classes, when there's a few minutes of quiet and my brain calms down, sometimes that's when things come to me. So I try to jot them down with pen and paper. I type up, I handwrite everything. And then once I think I have a finished piece, that's when I type it. I get more creativity that way. I've tried typing them as I go, like typing as the thoughts come in, and I don't like the final product as much. I really still like, with a song anyway, I still like that. I've got a piece of paper or two. I like the color of the ink or the pencil and just kind of seeing it take shape. And I like seeing lines I've crossed out. I kind of like seeing all that. I don't have anything with me. I'm out here on the porch, but if I was inside, I have a chair in my living room that is typically where I sit and write in the house. And all around it are scraps of paper that I could show you, like, here's a song I'm working on. Here's one I finished. to my wife's dismay, it's a pretty chaotic corner of our living room, but that's how it works for me.
Sorry about that. I had to cough, so I put it on or mute. That's kind of interesting, and I want to carry that a little further. So with music, are you writing the lyrics first and then bringing a tune to it, or did you have the tune in mind at the same time when you're writing the lyrics?
Good timing, because I see Nancy just added that question in the chat. So I appreciate that both of you are thinking on the same lines. It's 50-50. I'll have songs that come lyrics first with no melody. I'll have melodies in search of lyrics. And then my favorite ones are the ones that come at like the exact same time, where as the lyric comes together, it almost has a melody to it. When you speak it, it has a rhythm and a flow. And it's, I heard John Prine once say, and I really like this, he's like, I don't think of myself so much as a songwriter as a song catcher. And he's like, these things pop in your head and you better write them down quick, because if you don't, they're going to, go on down to somebody else and they're going to catch it. And I really can relate to the way I relate to looking at music that way. There's definitely been times where a song idea comes in my head, both the melody and the lyrics, and I don't write it down. And I think, oh, I'll remember that tomorrow. And tomorrow comes and you've got nothing. You can't even remember the first word of where you were trying to go. So I definitely recommend write it down. Or I know a lot of folks in the modern age, they'll record their voice. I got an idea, and they'll record their voice and record it that way. That works too. But get it recorded. And those of you who are non-musicians who are approaching this more for like writing essays and things, I think the same thing. If you think of a good opener and you think of a good hook, so to speak, that are going to grab the writer's or reader's attention, write that down, record it. Don't assume you're going to remember it tomorrow. That's definitely something I've learned from years of losing songs.
Dan, it seems like you've just answered the next question, which is how do you create engagement? And you said a good opener or a hook. I know sometimes in your songs, you often sing or write songs about small or maybe insignificant characters in history who were played instrumental roles or were hardworking people that no one knew about. When you write an article, is there any other way to create engagement besides that?
Yeah, so whether it's a song or whether it's an article, if the topic is a person, no, it isn't. And what I mean by that is, I'll use an example of, I recently did a song about 3 men from Juniata County, Pennsylvania, near Lewistown, who went down to the Alamo in Texas, fought and died at the Alamo. And I just thought that's an incredible story. So on one hand, you'd say the song's about them, but no, it isn't. It's about how do we relate to that? Like, what are the human connections? Can you relate to that? Can you relate to what would make a 20-something-year-old? I think the one guy was actually in his 30s, which to me is fascinating. No disrespect to any young folks attending, but I heard someone once say, you can get an 18-year-old to do anything. But the idea of a 30-something-year-old from Juniata County going, I got a good idea. I'm going to go all the way down to Texas and fight the Alamo. I thought that to me is the topic. So as a writer, you want to be thinking, again, I don't want to say the story within the story, but what's going to make a person relate to this? I don't want to say no one wants to pick up a story and just read dates and names, because I'm sure there's folks out there, myself included, that like the occasional, what folks call dry history. But that's not what you're after. You're looking for that human connection to this story. So although this happened almost 200 years ago, what's interesting about these 3 men isn't just the fact that they were born on such and such date and they went to Texas and died on such and such date. That's the quote unquote history, right? But that's not the story. The story is one guy was a doctor by trade, one was a lawyer by trade, and 2 of them were cousins. They all knew each other. And we have to fill in the dots, the blanks, so to speak, of what were they thinking? Do you think I don't know if they had wives or families, I don't know, but what would make them kind of pack up fairly successful lives and leave Pennsylvania and go down there? And to me, that's just the more interesting story. So anytime you're writing about any topic, if you can find those kind of questions but they're questions that people can relate to. Okay, I've never gone and fought at the Alamo, but have I done some weird things that, you know, other people might go like, what would make, you know, I had a full-time teaching job in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, and I left that to go to Idaho and be a logger. You know, what are you doing? I wasn't 18 years old. I was in my mid 20s. So we've all kind of done things where only you know why you did it. Maybe we don't even know why we do some of our things. But I think that's what I was tapping into when I wrote that song. And so we can all relate to that part of the story, right? And so that's kind of the hook you're looking for, is a hook that's relatable, and get it out there early. Get it out there early. If in the first few sentences or moments of reading, the person just feels like you're giving them a report of dates and names, or if it's more of a scientific thing, if you're just giving them scientific names of trees and funguses, like, you've lost them. You've lost them. And when I say them, if your audience is especially a non-science audience, which, let's face it, that's who we're usually trying to reach. We're not trying to preach to the choir. So when I'm trying to get the word out about the emerald ash borer here in Pennsylvania, you know, it's decimating our ash trees. You all know about that. How do I get folks to relate to that? I post a video of a humongous dead ash tree being taken down. It's eye candy. People watch it and they're like, wow. And then as quickly as possible, I make it about, like, you know, do you have a favorite tree? Do you have a childhood tree or you remember playing in? Now imagine that tree is gone. And so now you've got people relating to the story. And then a little bit later, I can get into the explanation of, well, this is an insect that we humans have accidentally brought here from another continent. And now we're talking about invasive species. But I think if I would have come right out the gate on that example and talked about invasive species in the emerald ash borer, I think I would have lost some folks. So it's all about engaging on that human level from a non-science point of view, and then you can tiptoe into the science.
Ben, I think we could bring you back to just do a whole lesson on creating engagement, because you've been at it for a long time. Thanks for that answer. Just for the sake of those listening, what's the title of that song about the three guys that went down to the Alamo? I know the song, I have the CD, but I can't remember the title.
It's called Pennsylvania to the Alamo, but I may have called it PA to the Alamo on iTunes and Spotify. And I got to tell you just a quick how we writers inspire each other. There's a neat story within the story there I'd like to tell you. I read a great book called Empire of the Summer Moon. At least I think that's what it was called, Empire of the Summer Moon. And the author's last name was Gwen. I'm a little rusty. I didn't have this prepared, so I'm freestyling here. And I read this book. It was about the Comanche Indians in Texas. And although he didn't necessarily mention our three Pennsylvanians, he talked about their group. They were called the Immortal 32. And these were 32 people that showed up towards the end of the Alamo. The Alamo had been putting out help. And everybody's like, we can't send help. And these 32 volunteers, including our three Pennsylvanians, they showed up and they knew what they were riding into. So anyway, he had the book was superb. I read it, and I definitely think his writing inspired me to write this story of our three Pennsylvanians. So when the song was done, I looked him up, found him. He's a professor somewhere in Texas, I believe. And this was a good year or two ago now, so I'm a little rusty on the details, but I sent him my song and told him that he inspired it, and he responded, very favorably. And I just thought that was cool. We as writers, we definitely inspire each other. And I would say, speaking from experience, don't be afraid to reach out, no matter how big or famous they are. When I read a good book, it doesn't matter if they're Pulitzer Prize winners. I at least try to send them a message and tell them how much I appreciate their work. And now and then you'll get a reply. And sometimes that reply is rather personal, and that really feels good. And, sorry, there's some noise coming up. I have a load of logs that I cut being delivered today. So I still do logging when I'm not school teaching and playing music. Got a load of cherry and maple coming up.
We better talk fast so we can hear you. Van, I don't think there's anything you said about songwriting that doesn't apply to just regular straight writing, writing either a blog or an article or whatever. The way you engage people is the same in many ways, tweaked a little differently, but it's fascinating to see how similar that process is. So any other tips you want to give to aspiring writers, because we're all aspiring writers at different stages of the game?
Well, if you can truly write because you're passionate about it and not care how many views you get or how much engagement you get, you're going to feel a lot better in the long run. I realized I started this by bragging about how, oh, I've got thousands of views and things on a certain video. That was an example, and I was trying to make a point. But that isn't why I do it. And I hope that's not why you do it. And I realize some of you might have to write for professional reasons, and your supervisors and whatnot are telling you we need to get so much engagement. And I'm sorry, I can't relate to that. And I don't know if I'm the person that can help you with that. But back to why we do what we do. We do it because we're passionate about something and we're trying to convey an idea. And if you stay focused on that, you're going to have far more success. Don't worry about the clicks. Don't worry about the numbers. Just stay passionate and stay engaging.
Okay. Van, for my kind of last formal question, can you tell us about anything you're currently working on that might be of interest to the listeners, and maybe why you chose to work on that?
So by work on, you don't mean the load of cherry and maple logs that's being delivered right now?
No, that's understood. That's understood. When you said the logs are being delivered to your house.
I'm sending my son out. He'll take care of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm working on a new album right now, and I'm having to rethink the entire formula. So you mentioned about half an hour ago to folks that I make CDs, and I still will make CDs, but CDs are meant, for me anyway, to be hand delivered. I play a concert, folks come up after the concert, they want an autograph, we shake hands, we get a picture together. That model's out the door. In fact, I came out with a new album in March. I had a CD release party here in Danville, and that has been my last concert. That was the last time I performed. I guess I did sneak an Elk Creek Cafe thing in, but so I've got this album sitting in my basement in the box. You get some mail orders, but any more folks who buy CDs, they want them because they want to meet the person. And I'm wondering if even books and publications are going to go in a similar direction. So many folks are going more to ebooks and online, reading, that those of us who are still buying a book are going to be doing it more and more so in person, meeting the author and getting it autographed. And I'm speaking from experience. I mean, that's, come to think of it, like the last 10 books I bought, probably at least half of them I bought in person because I heard a person speak at a local university and I wanted to meet them. And so I think this new album that I'm working on, I'm going to need to rethink my delivery. I've had some crazy ideas. One crazy idea was just put it 100% out there for free. No longer am I going to worry about selling CDs. And I've never really been in this to make profit in the first place, but by nature, I had to sell CDs to pay the thousands of dollars it cost to record and manufacture the CDs. Well, this new album I've recorded entirely at home on my MacBook. It's got a little bit more of a bootleg feel for sure. It doesn't sound like it came out of a studio. It sounds like it came out of my living room, because it did, but that's virtually free. And then I thought, well, if I'm not going to worry about thousands of dollars worth of CDs, do I want to just offer it for free? And I'm currently leaning towards not because I'm stingy, but because I think I'll get less engagement. There is something to be said about people valuing something they pay for. And I think all of us as writers need to just keep that in mind. I'm not saying it's not okay to give things away for free. I just explained how I often put videos out there for free and content out there for free on Facebook. And there's certainly times I give my music away for free, but people value what they pay for. And I'm going to use the example of a live performance to really illustrate my point. I get asked to perform all over the state. I have a fee I request to get paid. Do I occasionally offer to do it for free for a cause? Absolutely. If a person can explain to me the cause and what my efforts are helping, I'll do it for free. I can tell you it is a night and day difference. When I volunteer my services and I'm going to play somewhere for free, I show up and I'm about as popular as the broom. They'll be like, you can go over there in a corner, you're just do your thing over there in the corner. When someone is paying me several $100s to perform, there's a stage in that corner with spotlights and all the chairs are facing it. Why? Because they want to get their money's worth. They paid a couple $100s for this banjo player. They want to make sure people, and I see that same kind of thing even in writing and in recorded music. If you're just giving it away, people have this almost unconscious thing of, well, how good can it be? It's free. How much should I really value it? But if there's a little bit of buy-in financially and they've paid for it, well, they're going to value it a little bit more. And maybe you need a psychologist to explain that. All I can tell you is I've seen it firsthand, and I've seen it multiple times. So with my new album, although I'm willing to give it away for free, if I actually want people to listen to it, I think I need to keep playing with this model and talking to other musicians and figuring out what's the best way to get this out there. Because at the end of the day, I want my music heard. It's not about the money. I just want it heard. I don't write the songs to be forgotten. I write them to keep these topics alive and get people talking. So I hope that tells you a little bit about where I'm at with things, especially in 2020.
No, it's an interesting concept you're talking about because it's overlapping with the subscription idea, right? You subscribe to something and you get it monthly or whatever. And I know of 2 musicians who I have paid in advance for their upcoming album they're working on in the year. So it's the same with subscribing to I recently got a subscription to a magazine called the Montana Quarterly, and they're all writers out there that produce pieces, and it's 4 times a year. So you pay for it in advance, and it helps to fund the magazine. All right, well, we have time for some questions, and but Van, you want to tune your guitar for the next portion of your time. Do we have any questions? We don't see any more in the chat. Please go ahead and write them in. If you would, please. Any tough ones for Van?
And meanwhile, let me just invite everyone to contact me at your own leisure. I mean, our communication does not need to end right now. I'm honored that you asked me to share some thoughts and ideas, but if I've touched on something that you would like to talk more personally about, I'm more than happy to do that. You were kind, Sandy, to say I'm probably very busy with school starting, but the truth is no one knows what school's even going to be. And so I may be busy next week. I may not be busy next week, but I'm very honest. So if a person writes to me and they say, hey, do you have a moment to talk? I have some questions. I'll be honest. I will either say, yes, I do have some time, and I'll either get you by phone, or we can chat via email, or however you like to do it. Or I'll just say, hey, this week's a little busy, but you will not be bothering me. Please. I love to see more and more people writing about forest issues, especially. So I'm on your team.
I don't see any questions. Oh, here's a, will you be playing the Elk Creek under their tents anytime soon?
Thanks, Jared. I was just there Sunday. Yeah, so if folks don't know, Elk Creek Cafe is this wonderful place in Center County that's kind of a local brew pub and local food and just awesome live music venue. And under normal conditions, I play the first Thursday of every single month there. February was my 100th time performing there. I performed there in March for the 101st time, right? And then it shut down. So they've been doing music outside about a mile up, not even a half mile up the street at the Fireman's Grounds. And it works. There's tents, it's an outdoor venue. And they had me in July. I played there. And there's currently no plan to have me back. I think the challenge is there's just so many bands that would love to play at Elk Creek Cafe. And there's only a Saturday and a Sunday each week if it's not raining. And so I currently have no plans to be back there. And I currently have almost no plans to be anywhere musically. And I think that's okay. I think mentally it was really hard at first for me to accept, well, when will I play again? When will I play again? And the answer is out of my hands. It's out of all of our hands. So I stopped worrying about it. And I hope to perform again sometime soon, but I'm okay if it doesn't happen too. I think I need to be that way. Sorry, you're now getting the chickens in the background. Well, you're getting all the sounds of the Wagner farm. You got the log truck delivery and now the chickens.
Go ahead with your song, Van, and we'll see if we get some questions generated.
Sure. This is a song about log rafting on the Susquehanna River. And in the late 1700s, early 1800s, actually all through the 1800s, white pine logs were rafted to market from stands of white pine. And when I say to market, the really best market were the ship builders. So if you could get it down to the Chesapeake Bay, Annapolis, Maryland, Baltimore, there was some real big money down there where people wanted to build ships from our white pine. But there were certainly buyers all along the way. So for example, I find a lot of folks know that Williamsport, Pennsylvania was like the lumber capital of the world. Well, that wasn't till after the Civil War. Before that, Marietta Lancaster County. That was the lumber capital of Pennsylvania. And the reason was all the interior barn building, churches being built, houses being built, factories being built. They needed construction lumber, and white pine was what built America. So this is a song all about log rafting on the Susquehanna River. I hope you enjoy it. It's called The Crosscut Saw. Well, the war, it was over, Mr. Lincoln. Army was over and the spirits were gone. Sullivan County, where my grandfather came. The soil was rocky and the sky always rained. I remember Grandpa's stories of when he was a kid, of bison in the lowlands and elk on the ridge. But now they're all gone and a new hunt has begun to find the Tiadot and make sawmills hum. All I need is my crosscut saw, my double bit axe and 80 trees to fall. The spring, it's coming, I can smell it all around, and my soul's being tempted by that high water sound. Up on the loyal sock, it's straight and it's tall. There is pine up there like you ain't never saw. Only brave loggers bear the winter cold, and the snow falls heavy on that Appalachian fold. Well, it's up in the morning at 5 a.m. Throw down some biscuits, some coffee and ham. A 12-hour shift with a teamster crew, skidding logs to the water through the ice and snow. All I need is my crosscut saw, my double bit axe and 80 trees to fall. The spring, it's coming, I can smell it all around, and my soul's being tempted by that high water sound. We lash our logs together with hickory and oak. No rope, no iron, just pins and bows. A sweep at the front and back and a shack for the crew. 20,000 board feet ready to tie loose. When the ice finally breaks and the water's good and high, we'll head down the Loyal Sock, our crew of 5. A day on the raft down to Montoursville. We hit the Susquehanna where the water's smooth and still. All I need is my crosscut saw, my double bit axe and 80 trees to fall. The spring, it's coming, I can smell it all around, and my soul's being tempted by that high water sound. Once we get to Marietta, we sell off our logs, $100 split by 5 river hogs, and we head back north, walking all the way, with a hand on your knife and the other on your pay. It's a good season, we'll have 2 or 3 more runs, then this year is over and the summer has begun. I'll watch as the rust, it builds upon my tools, and I'll long for the day I'm back with my logging crew. All I need is my crosscut saw, my double bit axe and 80 trees to fall. The spring, it's coming, I can smell it all around, and my soul's being tempted by that high water sound. Hey, virtual applause. Well, that is a casualty of COVID in the year 2020, because I just totally blanked on that first verse. And I'm glad I could be honest and share that with all of you writers, because it's going to happen. Not just because I haven't sung that song live in 6 months, that didn't help, but there's times where I'll go in front of an audience and there'll be a song I sing every night and I can't remember the first line. It's just the way the brain goes. And so, it happens. No, it happens to all of us, and all you can do is smile and roll with it.
Well, Van, I thought it was a video word drop, you know, that didn't come through, because the line is the war it is over, and Mr. Lincoln had won, right? And I think you did. Yeah, that's it. And that's a great. That's kind of the way they looked at it. You know, people looked at it. Mr. Lincoln won the war.
Right.
So, All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You have kids to raise and logs to deal with there, but we so appreciate it. And we hope we'll see you again sometime soon. If you want to join one of the other sessions, if you're at home, if school is all virtual and you're not online as much as you think you are, you might want to join us for some of our other speakers. So thank you again, Van. And for everyone else that's listening here, actually we have a couple minutes. There was one last question I saw, just a moment here, or maybe a couple. So thanks, Van. Some great notes to you. There was a question though, I just want to, people are feeling very raw about politics now. Do you have to be careful about that in your music? Is that something you're careful about?
No, I think I've been using that to my advantage, at least on social media. My Facebook page is my Facebook page. And what I mean by that is I used to have like a Van Wagner music page, and then I had like just my private, here's my family going for a hike at Ricketts Glen. And instead anymore, I'm just embracing my personal Facebook page is my Facebook page. And I try to take on as many new friends as I can. But I don't get into the politics on Facebook. And instead I have these posts about Pennsylvania history and forestry, and I'll get comments like someone will say flat out, like, posts like yours are the reason I even stay on Facebook. I think people are hungry for something non-confrontational. There's a place for politics, I get that, but if you can capitalize on that and you can create something that is light reading, it's digestible, it's enjoying, and you can somehow deliver it in that atmosphere of politics, sometimes it seems to pull people out of that quagmire and they are gravitating to something positive to read about. So try to find a way to use it to your advantage. That was a good question.
Yeah, thank you, Van. And sort of, in some ways, you can use Facebook to run something up the flagpole and see if people are interested in it, and then go from there too. Yeah, or generate interest for that matter. Well, thank you so much again. We're going to take about a 2-minute break here, folks, and start exactly at 11 with our next speaker. We want to give you a chance to stretch your legs, though. Please don't run away. Come back. Van has to go, but the rest of you don't. And we want to see you back here exactly at 11. I have 5 of 11 right now, actually 4 of 11. So you've got 4 minutes to make a clothing adjustment, wardrobe adjustment, and be back. Thank you, Van. We'll be in touch. Okay, I bet you can hear me now, Claire?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I like that background there. Is that the Camp 8? Camp 8?
Yeah, yep,
theme?
exactly. This is Camp A right behind me.
Yeah, I have some similar ones, you know, of older growth, but this is the ridge above my home, which is about 1,000 feet higher than where I live. So my house is down there in the valley somewhere. We have long ridges that go sort of from the top to the bottom of the state, from sort of southwest to northeast, kind of curve. So
Nice.
we are going to get started here in just a moment. I see 11:01. I'm hoping everybody is back and we're ready to go, but I don't want to jump right in. I'll give you one more minute just in case there's some slowpokes there. And I'll close participants there for me. Let me just make sure okay. All right, we're going to get started, and I want to introduce to you Claire Boerichter. Richter or Richter?
Boerichter.
Boerichter, I'm sorry, Boerichter. I should have practiced that. And Claire is hailing to us from Minnesota today, where she works and writes and gets involved in a variety of projects. I first heard her on a podcast being interviewed about some work she had done. She has a fascinating background, which she'll share with us today. Part of that is she's been involved in firefighting for the Forest Service, and she also has been involved in teaching internationally as well as nationally, and has just a lot to share with us today. And she's not only going to be sharing with us about her own writing for most of the time today, but she's also going to be giving us a mini lesson on workshopping and what that means. And even though we're part of a workshop today, when we use the term workshopping, it's a verb, and it's going to be, and it's a noun, I suppose, too, but it's mostly a verb, and she's going to explain that to us, what that's all about. And so with that, Claire, I'm going to ask a question of you, and just the first question is, did I miss anything about you that you would like people to know?
Nope, that was a great introduction. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay, and then how did you get started writing, and what appealed to you most about it? In other words, being a writer, you know, what appeals to you or appealed to you about that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna be sharing my screen kind of as I'm talking. So hopefully you're seeing images showing up as I'm going. If you're not, feel free to let me know in the chat box. But yeah, so my earliest memories of writing were as a kid, and they were prompted by my parents. My family would visit historic Lincoln sites in the Midwest, and afterwards I'd be expected to write short booklets about what I had learned and experienced while I was there. And so as a kid, I got really excited about this. I love getting to blend together history with my own memories to try and make a story. And so as I got older, I kept on writing, just bringing in more and more of the things that were happening around me. And so as a college sophomore, I wrote a short story based around my experiences working as an archaeology intern in northern Arizona. You can kind of see that with this photo right here. And I actually won a writing award for that short story. And I started to think more about that old adage of write what you know. So later that year, I applied to be a wildland firefighter for the Forest Service. And it just felt like a really natural thing then to start writing about firefighting. So I ended up working 3 seasons out west as a wildland firefighter. And again, writing about those experiences just felt really natural. I was able to blend my memories and experiences with information about wildfires and firefighting and Western ecosystems. I really love this mix of the personal and the scientific. Working as a firefighter really made me curious about how fire functions on the landscape, which led me down a rabbit hole investigating fire-adapted ecosystems and fire-dependent species, and so much more. So this is what I really like about writing, is when you kind of find that sweet spot where the personal and the scientific really come together and meet.
Claire, when you say the personal, do you mean your personal interest?
Yeah, so the personal interest and also personal experiences and memories. So getting to talk about who I am in the piece and my own experiences and how they inform then what I'm learning about and how I'm communicating that. So using kind of my stories to then expand and talk about kind of maybe bigger scientific or environmental issues.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I guess to maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that I've written about. I write a lot about fire, as you might have guessed. I published a number of creative essays about my experiences as a wildland firefighter. And now as a master's candidate studying creative nonfiction at the University of Minnesota, I'm working on a wildfire memoir about my first fire season. So these pieces would be a little bit more in that kind of personal trend. But I also then work as a science writer for the University of Minnesota's Cloquet Forestry Center. Last year I produced for them a multimedia story map that was about a stand of old growth red pines, indigenous fire stewardship, mesification, and a lot of other things too. I really like story maps because they're this medium that allows me to bring together a story with other visual elements like photos, drone footage, maps, and a lot of other things too. So kind of as Van shared his music, kind of throughout, I'm going to share a little bit of my writing. And so the first piece I wanted to share is a creative nonfiction essay titled The Fire Rises. It was published in a magazine called Vela. It kind of follows me through my second fire season when I worked as the only woman on a crew of 10 firefighters. So I'm going to share just a little bit from that essay to give you a sense of what my writing is like. I begin to play a game with myself when we get pinched in by fire. I look at the crew and I think, if this went bad, who would I put money on to make it out? I am down by the riverbank with Dale, where he is having me light the madrone and manzanita. This is the final day of his backburn. We've been bringing fire down the mountain for the better part of a week. To the north and west is the Jenny Creek fire. To the south and west, the Big Windy fire. To the east, across the Rogue River, burns the Dad's Creek fire. Smoke hangs on us, grays every view. The raft guides who brought us in on their brightly colored boats kept wetting their mouths with the same series of words: eerie, unnatural, ghost-like. It is hard in the twilight, the sun red like clay, for them to recognize the river they know so well. There are 22 structures, and we are here for them. The largest is a lodge where Cary Grant once slept. The smallest is an outhouse for hikers to use. We've extended hoses around the grounds, improved the sprinkler system, and had a second Mark III pump rafted down to us. We keep 5-gallon containers of fuel, jerrys of gas and diesel for the chainsaws, drip torches and pumps in the middle of the horseshoe court. And instead of waiting for the fires to converge wildly, we have brought them here in slow, measured strips. I have dragged drip torches through poison oak. The heat felt like sunburn. The smell in my face is fine, soft ash. I have shot rounds from flare pistols, watch them explode into flame as they land, the sound like sucking wind, like fire rising. This lighting that we do, putting fire on the ground, brings about a quickening, the stir of breath and blood, as great sugar pines and Douglas fir torch like matchsticks, as the air blackens and fills with embers. So as you heard, this piece kind of blends the personal and the informative. I'm kind of working here to share wildland firefighting with an audience that might not be too familiar with that world. So again, kind of using my personal experiences in as a way to explore kind of a broader or bigger subject. So that's kind of one piece I wanted to share. And the second piece I was hoping to share with you is a little bit from the story map that I wrote for the Cloquet Forestry Center. It's called The Camp 8 Stand, the story of the Cloquet Forestry Center's old growth red pines. And this piece is a little bit more like strictly science writing. And again, I really enjoy how story maps allow me to bring in so many different mediums. So I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a second and reshare. So there might be a little shuffling on your screen, but I'm gonna be popping up with the story map.
Claire, can Can you tell us what Vela meant? Was that like a literary magazine that other article was published in?
Yeah, so Vela is a literary magazine started by a group of women, and yeah, they publish different creative nonfiction essays, so pieces really similar to what I was sharing.
Okay, nonfiction, yeah, all nonfiction.
Yep, all nonfiction, so they'll have kind of essays like that. They'll do some book reviews as well, but all nonfiction pieces.
Great.
So yeah, hopefully you're seeing on your screen now the Camp 8 stand. And I'm gonna move a little bit slowly down to the excerpt that I'll be reading from. I personally had so much fun putting this piece together. Not only did I get to do a bunch of different writing and interviews and talking to different folks, but I got to dive into photo archives and got to break the drone out and get some footage that way. So really cool way to get spring writing together with other mediums. So I'm going to read just a small excerpt from here as well. In 1911, just 2 years after the establishment of the Cloquet Forestry Center, founder Samuel Green designated a 44-acre stand of red pines to be left alone as a reserve. This reserve status saved the red pines of Camp 8, so named for a nearby logging camp, from being harvested as timber, a common fate which befell almost all of the red pine in northern Minnesota, with notable exceptions, including stands within Itasca State Park and the Lost 40. Many of Camp 8's red pines, scarred at the base by dark fire scars, their high limbs marvelously twisted in elaborate showings of sinuosity, are at least 200 years old. One particularly impressive specimen, a grand red pine called the sequoia, or the grandmother, dates back to before 1734, making this grandmother red pine nearly 300 years old. And here we have a photo of the grandmother. Ron Sievers, a retired CFC forest manager with a 40-year tenure at the center, describes the old growth red pines of Camp 8 as ancient and primeval. He talks about the reactions he's witnessed from various groups who visited Camp 8 over the years. Reverence for these red pines, how big they are, paired with fear, how small I am.
Claire, for those of us who are not that familiar with this concept of story maps, can you give us a little description of them?
Yeah, so story maps are kind of an ArcGIS program, and they're this great tool where they basically provide a lot of support to do a lot of the things I'm doing here. So they allow you as a platform to bring in writing with photos, with video and all those things. And it's a really useful tool because it's really user-friendly. I think I spent about a week familiarizing myself with the tool and what it could do. And then I just started plugging things in and was able to create this piece. So obviously I was lucky in that there were lots of images and drone footage, and I had done the writing and the interviews. So I had that experience. But then, yeah, I was able to construct this again with about a week's worth of poking around. So I think in that sense, it's a super useful visual tool.
There was a question that just popped up in the chat specifically about this too, Claire, and it says, do you build those in ArcMap or is it an auxiliary program?
So I will admit I'm a little bit confused by all the different iterations of like ArcGIS, and there's like all these subcategories and like badges and tools and things. So I just, to create this, I went directly to ArcGIS Story Map, and through that platform created this. They have been doing different things with Story Map. So like they did a huge revamp last summer. So the old like layered story maps are different from what you can see now. But yeah, I just went directly to Story Map, and I'm not sure quite what the differences are, but that's the tool I was using.
When most of us think of ArcGIS, we think of geopositioning kinds of connections here. Are these photos all linked in that way, or what? How does that come together?
So the cool thing is you can build really interesting maps on here. You can kind of see, I did a pretty simple one going a little bit further up, just talking about where the pines are. You can click and it'll show you, and you can kind of navigate around. So they do have like a map building tool on here because it is ArcGIS. Obviously, that's what they do well. So you can decide to do those things, or again, you can use it more as I used it here as like pulling things together. So it has that capacity, but it is a little bit different.
So it seems to me that you could click on that map and you could take you down into that forest and show you around in panoramic style kind of.
Yeah, and if you look around, there are lots of folks who are doing really great things. So I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but I'm working on another story map for the Forestry Center, the Cloquet Forestry Center this summer, and I'm really excited to incorporate a lot of audio in that as well. So it's great where you can embed, 30 seconds or a minute of, a forester talking about, X, Y, or Z, and I can write about it, and then you can click and hear that person talking about it too. Again, it's all really user-friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I will make sure to send this link out if folks kind of want to poke around and see a little bit more of what story maps are capable of. But yeah, that was one of the other pieces I wanted to share. So I'll just finish reading a couple more things and then we'll move on.
Quick question, Claire, is if you were to take all the text out of this story map, how long would the writing be, in pages, let's say?
I think it's like 12 pages with just the text as you go down.
Okay.
So Chuck Kramer, another forester with more than 4 decades at the Cloquet Forestry Center, says the Camp 8 stand gets into your blood. It is by far the most iconic site on the Cloquet Forestry Center. Students conducting field research, visiting foresters, school kids on buses, and local community members have all come and keep coming to stand beneath these ancient trees. But just as the Cloquet Forestry Center has changed since its foundation over a century ago, so too has the Camp 8 stand. While some management steps have been taken over the years to maintain the stand's early 1900s composition, today's Camp 8 appears drastically different from the stand that Samuel Green set aside in 1911. In the place of sweet fern, wintergreen, honeysuckle, and blueberry bushes, the once dominant ground cover, Camp 8 is now overgrown with dense hazel. Instead of an open understory punctuated in places by the broad bodies of rising red pines, the current Camp 8 is choked with the saplings of red maple, paper birch, and balsam fir, a radical change from its earlier, often remarked upon, park-like appearance. As the stand's current cohort of old-growth red pines approach the end of their life cycles, it's becoming increasingly clear that without human intervention, this reserve of red pines will almost certainly disappear. And here, if you can see, this is kind of the same photo years apart. So you've got this tree is here, this tree is here. And you can really see visually the differences in this stand. So I'm going to go back to sharing my PowerPoint. But yeah, those are just a little bit of kind of the writing that I'm doing. I don't know, Sandy, I kind of based this around some questions, but I embedded it also in the PowerPoint. So I don't know if you maybe want to ask those questions or if I should kind of just keep moving forward. I don't know.
No, keep moving forward. And if you don't answer a question, I'll bring it up at the end.
Perfect. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about my process of writing and tools and methods that are helpful for me that I thought might also be helpful for others as well. So when I approach a subject, I'm almost always looking at it as a story. And with that mindset, there are always certain questions that I'm asking myself. I'm looking for characters, people we can engage with. I'm looking to establish the setting or the environment. I'm looking for tension or conflict. I'm asking myself, what are the stakes? Why does this story matter? And I'm looking for a resolution or some form of conclusion that I can draw my readers towards. Again, I call this the act of storying. It's kind of translating real life onto that story structure. And I think this is really helpful in getting readers to engage with what I'm communicating to them. So I'm going to go through and just kind of break down some of these some of these methods and some of these questions. And starting out, I'm going to talk about characters. So obviously, if you're writing about real life, you've got a lot of people around you, and some of them are going to come into your work as characters. And so when it comes to characterizing people, I think it's really important to focus on their unique personal and physical traits, giving the readers identifiers that are easy to hold on to. So I've kind of pulled an example from that earlier essay, The Fire Rises, about my second fire season. And I pulled an example of myself characterizing Tom. As a side note, you can see Tom in this photo here, and he quite liked this description of himself, which also made me feel pretty good. So I'm going to read for you. Tom likes Daft Punk, the soundtrack to Moulin Rouge, and country western music. He drinks coconut water, Monster Ultra, and mushed apple smoothies, which come in squeeze packets for babies. He has worked 11 fire seasons, seen fire on both coasts, and when he walks, he swings, little bursts like firecrackers. When we drive, and for many, many hours we drive, Tom will sing and talk to me and sit in silence. So again, in just a few sentences, I've tried to kind of create, to bring Tom forward, and again, to give readers those kind of specific, unique things about his personality that will hopefully stick with them as they move through the piece. Moving on to the second question I asked myself of what's the environment and setting. I think this is where we as people who are really in tune with our natural environment can really shine. I love writing about place and landscape. I think there are so many lush specifics and details. There's so much specialized vocabulary that's really interesting to read. So I love leaning into these visuals and conjuring them up for my readers. I'm going to read a short little excerpt again from The Fire Rises, kind of showing how I'm building environment and setting and trying to really lock that into my readers' minds through images. I am perched on a prominent rock in a vein of scree on the side of a mountain. It is early in the season. This is our first real fire. The sun above is resolute as the winds switch around me. From here, I can see down into the folds of the mountain, out along the sagebrush flats, and off into the dry distance. I'm sitting lookout on the Lackey fan fire, my radio beside me, and my eyes keep going back to the dark band of black that has already burned. I can see, miles beyond it, smoke and clouds from the dark canyon fire, and it's handsome, all of these colors laid out like clothes. In the black, the charred trees sway and tip and shoot embers that eventually torch a pine up canyon. But it's the dust devils, not the crack of limbs, that I watch for. I begin to wait for them, to follow the winds across the desert, to see first the lifting of skirts at the border of the black, before the fullness of it is borne out. Dust devils in jet and obsidian ash, the size of them startling, incomprehensible, all seen from here, above. So after thinking about the environment and setting and how I'm communicating that to readers, another really important question, one that hopefully you can answer pretty early on is what are the stakes? Why does what I'm writing about matter to me? And why should it matter to other people? How am I going to present this so that they really care about what I'm writing about? So for me, when I'm writing about fire, it's often easy to pull out the stakes because in a lot of ways those stakes are life and death, and that's inherently really interesting to people. But it's not always as straightforward or as obvious for other topics. And so when that's the case, I always like to just think about going back to the basics. Why do you care about what you're writing about? And why should other people care? And how can you present that to them so it's pretty obvious to connect those dots? So I'm not going to read this example again because it's the one I started with. But basically the stakes, in The Fire Rises, this piece is that we're in danger. There's fire around us. Tension and conflict are really key to any piece of writing, and I like to think of them as kind of the heat, what you as the writer and your readers are drawn to. So in The Fire Rises, this really comes out in a pivotal scene when my crew is preparing a birthday dinner for me. We've been on this fire for almost 2 weeks. There are a lot of tensions. We've all been together for months on end, the same people. I'm the only woman in this group, so there are kind of those personal tensions. But then there are also environmental tensions, right? I'm actually in a place that's literally quite hostile and filled with rattlesnakes. And so kind of bringing these things together, bringing out that tension in your piece is, again, another hook for readers, something that is going to keep them engaged with you. So I'm gonna just read this scene. On my birthday, or rather a few days before, because otherwise the meat would spoil, they make me ribeye and sirloin and pork loin wrapped in bacon. The days have been hard on me. This fire roll has been hard. We've been set down on a dead fire to watch it shoot wisps like kisses to the clouds. For 8 hours a day, we sit with our flesh itching. It's unusual but not unheard of to babysit like we are. When this forest last burned 11 years ago, the spread was unimaginably vast, which makes men cautious. There are snakes on the beach where we have made camp. The first came to me out of sleep, a small brown serpent with a curious eye. I could have touched him with a finger. He had undoubtedly scented me on the air with his tongue. I sat up, shook my hair back on my shoulders, thought about how easily he could have slid himself in with the strands. The first rattlesnake I almost stepped on in the dark with my flip-flops. The second rattlesnake came out of the firewood pile. The third rattlesnake I do not see, but imagine every night as I lay near the rocks, my tarp on the ground, and the sky is my ceiling. So again, taking this moment to kind of conflate the environmental tension, the personal tension, to again try to grab readers and get them engaged and feeling kind of the heat of the moment and what's happening.
Claire, since you're giving us these great examples, let me just ask for clarity here. You call this creative nonfiction, is that correct? So it's got the elements of fiction, so to speak, in the creative writing, but and there's certainly some of that, but there's also the nonfiction, because this is something you truly were experiencing and this is real.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So creative nonfiction is exactly that. It's taking the tools that you would employ in fiction and using them to tell a personal or historical story. So I like to think about it a lot of like shaping and framing. So instead of, giving kind of like a dry historical account, you kind of find a way in, and that might be kind of taking that historical figure and as Van talked about, getting into their mindset. What are they thinking? What are they doing? What are their motivations? And so, yeah, I see it a lot as taking real experiences, whether lived or historical, or even, scientific processes, and finding ways to bring them to an audience that feels more engaging and alive. And yeah, there's so many different ways that folks do that I find, really fascinating.
Yeah. Can you think of writers that might be nationally known who write in this fashion?
Yeah, so I think John Krakauer is a good example. He's a little bit more journalistic, but he writes about mountaineering and the outdoors in a lot of ways that are really engaging. I think there's a woman named Robin Wall Kimmerer who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. So she's talking a lot about concepts of forestry, but she's also bringing in her own cultural background as well as her own personal background with all these different sorts of stories. Trying to think, look over and see my bookshelf. Yeah, I can put together a list too if folks are interested. I work with a professor of writing named Kim Todd, who kind of similarly, she's always writing about the environment, but she's doing it in such a way that it's engaging and it's storytelling, which personally is, I guess, my favorite way to be consuming information is kind of embedded within those story elements.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the last thing I always like to consider is if there's some form of resolution or conclusion to what I'm writing. And oftentimes, because life is not fiction, there isn't, right? We don't get to write these clean little endings to our lives or to a problem or whatever. So often when that's the case, I like to turn towards kind of an imagined future or conclusion that I hope to reach. And I try to get my readers to kind of imagine that future with me. So I'm going to share an example from the Camp 8 multimedia story map that I talked about earlier. And so a lot of this piece is investigating the stand of old growth red pines. It's talking about indigenous fire. It's talking about the removal of fire from this fire-dependent ecosystems. And it's asking the question, should we return fire to this place? And when I finished writing the piece, I talked to all these folks. People had so many interesting ideas, and they wanted to move forward in different ways, but none of that was happening. And so to kind of draw out a conclusion of this piece, I again take a moment and step back and try to think about what's happening and get the readers to kind of imagine the possible futures with me. So I'm just going to read a little bit from that. Restoring fire to Camp 8 in the spring isn't an easy or forever fix. The stand's old-growth red pines will, as all these things go, eventually die, and Camp 8 will experience rebirth either as a young red pine stand or a mesified stand of hardwoods. What the stand can do, however, is serve as an example of active, thoughtful land stewardship. It can stand as a visual memorial to the culturally meaningful uses of fire by the Ojibwe Native peoples. It can provide crucial knowledge as a living laboratory, as Andy David, the CFC's Director of Operations, likes to say, which can teach us about old growth and the impacts of climate change. Come visit the Camp 8 stand. Look up at these immense, fire-scarred, old-growth red pines. Touch their scarlet and orange and brown-plated bark. Listen to the wind as it moves through them. They have stood as witnesses to so much over the last 200 years. This coming spring, perhaps they'll see a little more. Perhaps it'll be a figure, maybe Lane, maybe Kyle, maybe one of the firefighters participating in the treks. Perhaps this figure will be carrying fire, lighting the ground carefully, tending slowly to their broad bases. Perhaps from their height, they'll see the fire glowing, a shine of bright firelight restored to this place, which has known fire for so long. Yeah, I guess I'll stop for a second. I realize I've kind of just been talking a lot. I don't know if, Sandy, you have any questions, or if any other folks do, kind of as I'm going through?
Sure, let's take a break here, Claire, because there might be some questions. You've kind of, because we discussed these questions, you've answered most of them. One thing you haven't, and you've woven in tips for aspiring writers, but let me come back to that in a moment. Let me just ask you this: what are you currently working on? You said another story map for this forestry center there, and
Yeah.
you're working on your, what would be your Master of Fine Arts project in related to firefighting. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up a little later. So I'm writing for the Cloquet Forestry Center again this summer, working on a story map for them. And in this story map, I'm kind of focusing on the last 60 years at the Cloquet Forestry Center. So looking at kind of the people, the research projects, and the outreach and educational programs that have shaped the center. And so similar to this story map you are seeing now, that is going to pull in lots of kind of cool old historical photos. We've got some drone footage. We've got a lot of audio. So that's the project I'm kind of working to finish this month, and hopefully be publishing for them in September. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Minnesota in their creative writing program, specializing in creative nonfiction. And I'm working on a memoir about my first season as a wildland firefighter. So I worked over 1,000 hours of overtime my first season in about a 5-month span. I spent a lot of time in the backcountry in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. So kind of getting to dive into those memories and those experiences, kind of as you're saying, in a similar way to in the Fire Rises essay. And then I'm also working on an essay about Itasca State Park in Minnesota. I was going to read a little bit of an excerpt of that for you guys later, so maybe I'll hold off on that. But yeah, writing about fire in northern Minnesota as well. You
are also teaching, right? You're teaching creative nonfiction writing there at the University of Minnesota, right?
Yeah, I'm a graduate instructor here. So I work with undergraduate students, and this will be my 5th year teaching, my 3rd year teaching at the university. And that's a great experience to get a lot of excited young people and to get them writing.
So we have a question kind of along this line here, Claire. It says, how do you approach other topics for writing? As a student, do you have any tips on how to work with topics that are assigned to you, but which aren't necessarily something you're inherently passionate about or have experience with?
Yeah, so I kind of go back to those questions I asked earlier. There are definitely things that I've had to write about that just aren't as much, a burning passion for me as fire. And so I always kind of think about it as slipping into a topic sideways. I guess an example, one of the things I'm writing about this summer is kind of an educational program. And the program itself is really cool, but it's maybe not something that necessarily I on my own would have been like, yes, like I want to write about this like educational program. I'm super excited about it. But while doing interviews, one of the women who's an instructor was describing her kind of like educational session and what she does when she gets students. And it was this really cool image of, you know, them looking at different like water critters and like getting to understand water quality by like sorting like different like macro invertebrates into different sections and things like that. And so like that image to me was a really cool, beautiful, interesting image. And so I decided to start that piece with that image, because to me, that was where there was tension and interest, was like, wow, the excitement of all these kids coming together, of getting to see these like many-legged, weird-looking, like, you know, macro invertebrates and getting to do something with them. And so for me, I found a way to kind of, you know, I didn't start saying like, you know, 60 years ago, they developed this educational program. I started with an image of the kids being there and the excitement and what they were doing, because for me, that was more interesting, and I could kind of slide my way in. That made me excited. So I think, you know, I think most of us have some interest or some tie into no matter what the topic is. And maybe that's taking a step back and thinking, what is that for me? Because when you're interested and you're showing that interest in your writing, that is going to pull in readers.
That's very interesting. It's sort of a video technique you're talking about, but you're applying it in writing, you know, the way a documentary might start, where it's focused in on one small thing and then come back to look at the bigger. Claire, I think what I'd like to do, you did such a great job answering the questions and kind of condensing down what kind of writer you are, how you write, a lot of tips here. I'll give one shout out again. If there's any other question for Claire about her writing, please get it in the chat and we'll answer that. And then we're going to shift over to the workshopping approach, because that might give you a little more time, which we would benefit from, but I don't want to rush any questions that people might have here.
Yeah, so I might talk about too, I got a few brief slides on like engaging readers, and then yeah, jumping into the workshop model, which I'm always really thrilled to talk about with folks. Yeah. Go
ahead on that then. And if anybody has a last question about her writing, please get it in there.
So when it comes to engaging readers, I think one of the easiest ways is to just engage them with a question. So asking questions really brings in readers as part of the story. They're being asked to think and gather information, draw conclusions. There's a sense of some unknown that together you as a writer and them as readers are working to uncover, which again, I think creates a really good sort of tension. I often imagine this is sort of a journey. I post a question and alongside my readers, we're working towards a destination or a conclusion. And so an example I had from this was again in the Camp 8 stand piece. In the earliest paragraphs, after I've talked about the process of specification, how that's changing the ecological makeup of the Camp 8 stand away from old growth red pines, I just asked the question, why is this happening? What's causing these historical ecosystems to so rapidly shift to something new? Why are the red pines of Camp 8, after centuries spent thriving on this landscape, now in danger of disappearing? So I think this just gives a little bit of mystery to what's going on, right? We're directly talking about something, we're working together to uncover it, and then you kind of serve as a guide, as the writer, kind of pulling your readers through the piece. And another key element for me of engaging the readers is kind of being aware of who I am in the writing. So you were kind of seeing two different styles of my writing. The one fire essay in which I'm pretty clearly in there as part of the story, and then the story map in which I'm not. I do not appear at all in that piece. And those because those pieces of writing are doing really different things. There are so many different examples, right? You've got you know, comedic writers who are making sly or funny observations. You've got writers who just really aren't visible. You've got writers who are a huge component of the story. And so sometimes being mindful of your role, who you're going to be in the piece, I think can really help you, again, use that voice to engage readers. These are the kind of things that I'm working on right now that I mentioned. Yeah, and so I guess a final 3 tips before moving into the writing workshop. things that I talk with about my students a lot, and things that I think are really helpful as all of us are approaching writing. And one of those is just really lean into images, especially as people like us who are really attuned to the natural world. There's so much you can offer readers by just describing in detail the environment. You can show them what a black ash looks like or how a ruffed grouse is burrow roosting. And that image is so much more powerful than just telling an audience dry information. So I often think of this as showing versus telling. If you can create a beautiful image for someone, they're gonna lock onto that in a way that, you know, just giving them facts is maybe not gonna connect with them. I also really like to encourage folks to do free writes, especially if you're approaching a new writing topic, you're maybe a little bit nervous about it, which, you know, most of us are. And free writes are these open exercises where you write about anything and everything, how your day is going, something interesting you learned, maybe how much you don't like writing. It can really be whatever, but the whole point is just to keep writing for a short period of time, usually 3 to 5 minutes, and it kind of gets your thoughts flowing. During the free write process, the only rule is that there's no editing. You're not worrying about spelling or grammar or coherency, none of that. You're really just warming yourself into that process of writing. I find that when I'm nervous to approach a piece of writing or I don't know where to go, starting with this free write in which I am not worrying about anything is this really great way to get myself kind of launched and feeling comfortable with what I'm doing. And the last piece before moving into the workshop is that you have to remember that writing is a process. So no matter how good a writer, no matter how long they've been doing it, nobody just sits down and writes a perfect thing. You have to brainstorm ideas, you're gonna write different drafts, you're gonna edit, you're gonna revise, that's all part of it. You can see the photo here. This is the poem One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. It's a really famous poem. And you can see, you know, the final product is beautiful and polished, but this is where she started. And I think that's important to remember. The only goal of your first draft is that it not be the final draft, right? So just embrace the flaws of that first attempt and keep going. That is writing. It is a process. We all kind of work forward towards revision. Which I think really naturally leads into the peer review workshop, which is the main place where writers can come together and receive feedback on their work. So I have been involved in peer review workshops for many years. It's kind of the core of most writing classes. And so the peer review workshop is when writers share their early stage work with a trusted group of peers who are then going to offer them feedback. These are usually pretty small groups, anywhere from 3 folks to 12. And they kind of operate in 2 different stages. First, you have the reading period, and then you move into the discussion-based workshop. So during the reading period, writers email each other their early drafts, usually about a week in advance. And this is where, as readers, everyone engages with work that they've been sent. Engagement in this sense looks like a lot of marks on the page. So during the reading period, as I'm looking at, you know, my peers' work and I'm trying to engage with it, I tend to ask myself a series of 5 questions, which I think really can help me shape how I'm thinking about the piece, and I think can be really useful then to whoever the writer is as they're getting my feedback. So the first question I tend to ask myself when I'm reading their piece is what is my favorite line here? What is my green line? A green line is a sentence that's so good, it's interesting, it's beautiful, it's funny, whatever, that it makes you green with envy because you wish you had written it, right? So you're gonna tell them, oh, your entire piece, this is the sentence that, wow, like it was so good. You can see in my example here, I've kind of highlighted everything in green, and I kind of said why, you know, I like this sentence because it's doing X, Y, and Z, and that was really cool. Next, as I'm looking at their piece, I try to kind of discover what is the heart or the theme or the main message of what's going on here. What am I supposed to take away from this? What is it trying to do? This is really important to identify for the writer. So many times as a writer, you think you're saying one thing pretty clearly, but then, you know, people will read it and they'll look at something totally different. So this is such useful information. This is what I think your piece is about, and this is what I think it's doing. So again, you can see I highlighted what I thought was the main message of this piece, and then I kind of left a little comment here. talking about what it was doing, and maybe some suggestions I had for it as well. The third thing I'm really working to do is to highlight the aspects of the piece that are great. They are working so well, and I'm really excited about them. This is a hugely important part of the workshop. People need to know not only what isn't working and what needs to be further developed, but also like what they're doing super well and the fact that they should continue doing that these are things that are working for them. So again, you can see I highlighted the part that I really liked, and then I gave, again, a specific comment of like why this is working so well for me. The fourth thing that I'm thinking about, the fourth question I'm asking myself is about aspects that could really benefit from revision or additional development. I'm thinking about, why aren't they working? What concrete suggestions do I have for improvement? And how will these suggestions ultimately improve the piece given what it is trying to do? So again, being as specific as possible. And maybe sometimes you don't even know, but just say, there's something about this that isn't quite working for me. I think it might be this or that, right? But kind of letting them know what you're thinking, maybe why that's not working, or thoughts for maybe how to improve or further develop it. And lastly, I like to share any lingering questions, right? Maybe have you thought about trying this? Why did you put this here? Can you explain this concept a little bit more? Anything like that. I think asking questions of a writer and getting them to think about things from your perspective can be really, really useful. So after you've gone through the reading period, you get together for the discussion-based workshop. Each piece of writing is going to receive a dedicated discussion time, so anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, and that really depends on the length of the piece and whatever your workshop group wants to do. So you're all together, you've all read the pieces, you've left your comments, you've marked it up, you decided who's going first. So normally the writer does not speak for the first part of their workshop. You're going to sit there quietly, you're going to listen to everyone kind of talk about what you've done. Their discussion is kind of going to follow maybe those questions that I laid out. And then at the end of the workshop, you as the writer get to come forward and then ask direct questions and supply answers. I think this is a really useful part of the workshop. Sometimes it feels unnatural. You want to jump in and explain things and talk about why you did this and answer those questions. But often it's more useful for you to sit back and just hear what everyone else took away and what they're thinking. Because that's how your writing goes into the world, right? Like you don't get to sit with your reader and like explain things to them. And so how your work is being perceived, that is really important information for you to know. And maybe you don't like how it's being perceived or you want to change things, and that's useful to find out. So after the workshop is complete, that's then when everyone is going to exchange their notes, right? And everyone's going to get to see kind of the marked up copies of what they've been doing.
Claire, let me quick interject two questions.
Mm-hmm.
One question, actually, one statement. So the statement is, you have a handout that you're providing to us, to our group today. We didn't hand it out in advance, but everyone involved in this workshop will be getting that with some of these things, because right now it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, some of those different points. So, but the second thing is, when they're doing the critiquing of a writing, is it known? Do you keep it anonymous? Would there be a benefit to that? I'm just curious. I don't know if we would do it, something like that, but.
Yeah, so all of my workshop experiences have been like in person. So you're all sitting in the room together or you're on Zoom together. And so you can kind of see who's giving you feedback. So in those cases,
do they know who's writing their critiquing when they're critiquing it?
Yes, I guess all the workshops I've done, you do know who you are critiquing. I suppose you could do it not knowing, but that's never how I've done it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if this feels like an overload of information. I get really excited about this, and I usually get like a full class period with my students to talk about it. So I'm apologies if I'm throwing a lot of things at you at once. I will provide you with this PowerPoint, so hopefully those steps will kind of help as you think about doing this on your own. Again, I think workshops should feel really approachable. They're really doable. They actually work very well on Zoom. I've done them a number of times. But yeah, it does require work to have a successful workshop. I always like to reference what's called the peer review sandwich as a guide. You can kind of see the little graphic here on your screen. So having a writing workshop is vulnerable. It doesn't matter how good a writer you are or how long you've been doing it. It's not always easy to take feedback. And so I always like to think about structuring a workshop around the peer review sandwich. So you're going to begin, again, telling that person what they did really well. This is my green line. These are the aspects that I really liked. Like, this is what's working, what you should keep doing. After you've kind of like laid that foundation, then you can move more into your critique. You know, the questions I had, what maybe didn't land for me, thoughts for improvement and development. And then after you've had that discussion, then you kind of round out again, talking about those things that were really working and that are really exciting for you about the piece. I think structuring your conversations in this way can again create a really positive peer review workshop atmosphere, which is super important as you're, you know, being vulnerable and sharing your work.
Claire, just because it relates to just what you were saying here, the question has come in during the reading period. Do you actually edit the document as well, or just give suggestions and ask questions?
So I would just give, if you're doing it on the computer, I would probably just do suggesting or track changes so that they can actually see and decide whether or not they accept those changes or they don't. My students, I think the first time they get papers back from me, there's always some horror because I love writing all over their work. And I don't see that as being a bad thing, or more writing isn't like your work needs more work. A lot of times it's like, man, I love this sentence. This is so interesting. Have you thought about this? So I love giving lots of comments and thoughts. But I also have to recognize that I am one reader and I have one set of opinions. And potentially that writer isn't going to agree with all the suggestions that I've made, or they're going to have different thoughts, or they're going to go in a different direction. And so I think that actually my guidelines for writers, that's one of the things is, you know, understand you're going to get constructive criticism, being open to that and hearing it, but also ultimately trusting your gut. Some people, frankly, are just not going to give you very good advice. Like, that happens. So just because someone says do X, Y, or Z, that doesn't mean that you do it. You think about it, but maybe it's not actually useful to you and what you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so kind of my guidelines for writers, and then yeah, for readers, you know, being respectful, thoughtful, genuine, constructive, kind of all those things that we know to do, but are kind of good to reorient as you move into the workshop space. And then I'll just leave you with some final thoughts. The first one is to really ask yourself, what does this piece of writing want to do and want to be? Is it offering information, raising a question, communicating a scientific principle? Once you figure out that discover part, try to orient your critiques around that. Maybe I want the piece to do and become something else, but if that's not what the writer is doing, that's not necessarily useful information for them. Another thing to focus on is higher order suggestions over lower order ones. So a lower order suggestion would relate to grammar or spelling or punctuation, the kind of mechanics of writing. These things are really easily fixed. Higher order suggestions are talking about major ideas or clarity or structure, development of themes and characters. So higher order things are way, way, way more important to what the piece is actually doing. So again, you know, focusing on if someone used punctuation correctly, not super useful compared to, you know, are you communicating this big idea in a way that makes sense to me and isn't engaging? Yeah, and I guess the last thing is that the only goal of your first draft is that it not be the last draft. Let this give you a lot of freedom to take risks. I like to see workshops as a space where people try things out. And maybe you do something knowing like, this might fail. Maybe this isn't a good idea, but I'm going to trust this group of people to tell me and let me know. So yeah, kind of the same as Van. If you're interested in the things I've talked about, or you want to chat a little bit more, these are kind of the different ways that you can get in touch with me.
Claire, you said you'd be providing this PowerPoint. Then will that be your handout, or was there a sheet?
Yep, so I'll send this PowerPoint, and then hopefully that'll kind of walk you through, especially with those workshop steps, the different ways to approach that.
Sure, thank you. Any questions for Claire? I know this was a lot, and it seems a little bit overwhelming here. Here, whoops, let's go back to the chat there. No, okay. So, So here we got a comment here. I'm really enjoying this and getting a lot from it. Did I hear that this is a series of writing webinars? How can I register for the rest of them? Well, Agnes, we will tell you about that, but yes, there's 3 more to go sessions. And if people want to keep going after that, we may just think about that. And we meet great people who are writers and who have spent more time on writing than the rest of us, for sure. And so we're going to keep doing that. And we have Jared is going to just tell us a little bit about next week, I think kind of a PR piece. And Claire, we thank you so much for joining us. We hope you'll join us in some of our future sessions and see how we're doing and see if we stay true to all these great approaches you've talked to us about. Jared, can you tell us about what's up? It's the week after next. It's on the 28th, I think it is. Is that right?
That's right.
28th.
That's right.
Yeah,
Sandy.
28th at 10 in the morning. That's a Friday, 28th of August.
That's correct. Session 2 is Friday, August 28th, 10 to noon. So same time, different day. But first of all, thank you, Claire. That was great. And I said thanks to Van before he left. This whole thing has been awesome to be a part of. So I appreciate everything you guys brought to the table. So yeah, we're excited about the next session as well. And you can go to rothrocksaf.org, the same place that you would have registered for this to find out more information. But we have 2 other presenters that we're excited about, Dominic Swentowski and Annie Maloney. Dominic is an author, a fly fishing guide. He's also a musician. He spends his time fishing for wild brown trout and here in central Pennsylvania, and he writes extensively on his blog/website, troutbitten.com. So you can check that out in between, get to know him and what he does a little bit. But he's very passionate about what he does, so I'm very excited to see what he has to say. Annie Maloney, she is the executive director of the Foundation for Sustainable Forests. She also teaches writing and speaking and other environmental educational topics at Allegheny College. So yeah, once again, very excited for both of these guys at the next session, August 28th, 2020, 10 a.m. to noon.
Thanks, Jared. I'll just add too, you know, we got to keep an open mind about things, and I'll just confess I'm not interested in fly fishing in the least. I find it a very tedious thing, though I have family members that do it. But I actually read that blog, Trout Bitten, and just enjoy, there's a certain genre that he writes in, but a certain group of his articles are just great. And I just love reading them, even though I'm not interested in fly fishing. So if you go to that troutbitten.com, you may find you agree with me or maybe disagree. I want to go to Sarah now to kind of bring a closure here in the last few minutes. And then until then, we'll see you all. I'll see you all next time around.
Thanks, Sandy, and thanks, Claire. That was awesome. Because I have the floor, I'm going to actually ask you a question. With regard to workshopping, it sounds like you already need a draft in order to do that. Is there any format, or maybe you could get back with us about this part of it, is there any format that allows you to do that brainstorming session, or is that you just get together and you bounce ideas off of, or like how can you maybe formalize that, like the beginning of the process?
Totally. So yes, you can definitely workshop, brainstorm, do that together. Usually I think of that as like kind of like a proposal. So like have some ideas that you're writing down, other folks do that too, and then you come together and share and talk about it and actually like workshop the proposal. So you have to do some like pre-work on your own thinking, but I think it's so personally useful for me to have an environment of writers and people thinking that way. So definitely would encourage that at the earliest stages as well.
Thanks, Claire. And the reason I bring that up is just because, you know, again, that's kind of where we're at with this. We're kind of at that brainstorming session of what do we want to create out of this. And I think, you know, workshopping is definitely where we'll probably end up, like taking that format and trying to create, you know, I hate to use the term because I think it's overdone, but it applies here, like a safe space where people can feel comfortable sharing their writing, doing that brainstorming process. Maybe you have an idea of something you want to talk about, or write about, or maybe you have an assignment of something you need to talk about and you can't get over that. That free writing idea, that's perfect, Claire. I mean, I've never really thought about that, but like, just start writing and don't worry about what comes out. Like maybe that just helps you get over that roadblock, or maybe you're encountering some other thing that's, keeping you from writing. So you've given us a lot of amazing tools. Van, gave us some tools as well. There are some, common threads here. So my challenge out of this is to write up a little summary of what we learned today and after every session. And maybe, to our attendees, maybe that's something, that can help you in terms of writing, like maybe write up something about, today's sessions. And it doesn't have to be long, but, just, a few thoughts about what you learned today and just write about something. So again, what we're trying to create here is a group of people of SAF folks and associated natural resources professionals. How can we improve our writing? How can we help each other? How can we work with one another? Again, we're not going to solidify that today, but by session 3, if you guys have some good ideas of how we'll spend some time after session 3 figuring that out. What is it going to look like? How are we going to break ourselves up into groups? Is it going to be everybody? Is it going to be, a group of 3? Claire, you recommended 3 to 12. That seems to be a good group. Maybe we break up into breakout rooms on Zoom, and have different sessions. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can inevitably, apply what we've learned here and again, create these like-minded groups to help each other, continue to pursue and improve our writing skills over time. But that's where we want to take this eventually. It's not just these 4 sessions. That's the start of it. And then we hope that we can grow it into something different and maybe even continue having sessions into the future. We don't know. We'll see what we end up creating after all of this. So we'll see you 2 Fridays from now. For those of you who signed up, you are already registered. I'll be sending out the recording to this to you all in a couple of days, as well as a link to our session on the 28th. We still have room. We have room for about 20 more folks who can join us every day or every session. So if you enjoyed today, please let your colleagues know. Say, hey, this was really interesting. Why don't you sign up and join us for sessions 2 through 4. Those of you who join us live for at least 3 sessions, we'll send you a free book called Writing Well. And we'll mail those out after the 4th session. So there's a freebie attached to this, along with just the amazing amount of information that you get. And again, this creation of a group of like-minded individuals who are going to improve their writing over time. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.